till you're done. Just turn 19, you've had your fun. So much in this world that looks like me or the her I'm now meant to be. Bye, everyone's got one. I'm so excited, I'm gonna look so dumb. And I could learn to walk and talk like you, or I could learn to try something brand new.
How do you go from a small idea to big impact? You enable the universe to conspire in your favor. Lots of you may think this sounds very esoteric. And how does that happen? And what do? It's something quite amazing that happens when you start following your true path. I've always known from a young age what I wanted to be. I always knew that my true path was that of a creator, someone that loved to make something of value to other people out of something that was pretty invaluable, and hand it over and enable that to make impact. I always had lots of little businesses growing up, but they all had this common thread between them. It was that of adding value and having positive impact. When people started to ask me, what are you going to be when you grow up? That was easy for me. I wanted to be a master creator. I wanted to be an architect. And so my subject choices going forward in school were all dictated by becoming that architect. I needed to take science, which I was really not any good at. So I went through school and went through my subjects, but when I got home in the afternoons, that's when I was able to become the creator, the architect again. And I would do awfully a lot of things to my parents' house. And eventually, during the April holidays, my parents said to me, well, if you go outside, just get out of your bedroom, stop repainting it, go outside, and if you grow vegetables, we'll buy them from you. So I begrudgingly went along to the garden center, and I was overwhelmed by the copious amount of seed and fertilizer I needed to buy, and the amount of money I wasted. But I was going to do this properly. And I got home, and I sat in the middle of the vegetable patch. I had a tape measure between my knees. I'd drawn centimeter signs on my fingers. And I needed some help, because I just couldn't get the seeds to stay in the ground. And I asked Maggie, our domestic worker, to come and help me. And it was when Maggie turned to me and said she couldn't understand what the seed packers were telling her to do. But then she started to relate to me how she had once tried to plant her own vegetable garden. And she struggled like me. But then the birds ate the seeds out the soil. She didn't know what was a plant and what was a weed. But more importantly, Maggie was walking sometimes up to 2 kilometers to collect a bucket of water. And she couldn't just take majority of this water and put it on a bare patch of earth in the hope that it touched a seed. So I decided that I wanted to be a bit of a creator again, even in that dirt. And I wanted to come up with a way in which Maggie and I could plant perfectly. And that idea was real gardening. It was really simple. I was 16 years old and in grade 10. And that idea was to put seed and fertilizer in a biodegradable color-coded paper strip at the correct depth and distance apart. All the other information you needed to know was already on the strip. So what you needed to do was put the paper in the ground so that the colored area was above the soil, and you just needed to add a little bit of water, 80% less water to be exact. This now became my little craft project at school, at home, and my hobby, and I would make these seed tapes, and I would sell them to my mom's parents for pocket money. And I went back to doing my normal subjects at school. But what happened was my grade 10 science teacher took me aside and told me I was failing science and there's no way that I could continue on higher grade and I needed to drop to standard grade. And at that moment, that was telling me that I could not be that master creator when I grew up, because you cannot become an architect if you don't have higher grade science and matric. So I begged and I pleaded if there was something I could do for additional marks. And she said if I entered anything into ESCOM Expo for young scientists, she would be able to give me additional marks, and that would get me through to the next level. So I entered my now craft project hobby into ESCOM Expo, and I began to follow that path again, my path of creating impact and creating something of value. And I enabled the universe to show me the bigger plans it had in store for me, which was that to take my project around the world. I won a gold medal at ESCOM Expo, and I was asked to represent South Africa in Stockholm. I won an international award from the royal family in Stockholm, and I felt on top of the world, and I felt invincible. And I came back to South Africa thinking the world was my oyster, I'm going to become this architect, no one can say no to me now. But little did this girl know that a few months later, a letter arrived from the University of Pretoria that was a rejection letter. I didn't get into architecture school. I wasn't good enough. Even as much as I had done, I still was not good enough to get into that program. But this was my path. This was what I'd known from when I was that grade 1 student. This is what I wanted to be. And when I started to follow this path, everything started to collide and work in my favor. So I went up to the University of Pretoria and I sat in front of the dean's office until he came out and I walked him to his car. And I begged and pleaded that, just like I begged and pleaded to stay in science, I begged and pleaded to get into architecture. He told me he'd give me 3 months, and I needed to stay above 75% the entire time. And if at one point I did drop below 75%, I was out. And I took that, and I knew I was going to excel. And I did excel. Real gardening went into the bottom drawer. I graduated. That was the most amazing day. And I went on to become an architect. And I saw real gardening as it was one of the many creations in my life, and it was going to get me to this next step of becoming an architect. I started to focus on developing a way to sustainably build low-cost housing, taking over what we now look at as the RDP model, because I don't believe that that is humane. And in this path, I started to work on the mines, Marikana mine, to actually be exact. And I was overwhelmed at the amount of unemployment, the amount of women that could not provide for their children, and the amount of hunger. And that these women that I'd see on the side of the road daily while I was driving to work started to reignite that shining example of real gardening, what it could actually do, could be brought back to life. And possibly I could create it in a way in which it would positively affect these women's lives. So I was fortunate enough to get a backing from a big corporate, and they invested, and I was able to start up my business. But now it was a whirlwind of big businessmen that knew a lot about business, and I didn't, telling me how the business should be run. And the first thing was to mechanize the production method so we could reach scale and we would pump out large volumes of this. And in the middle of the night, one night, I woke up with this gut feeling, and I just felt like I was going off my path, that something wasn't right. And from a very young age, I've always liked something that is tactile, handmade, creating impact through creation. And I turned around and said, well, no, I don't want to go mechanized. I want to create a handmade method that's going to produce my product. So the big corporate started to retreat because they said I'd never be able to get to scale, and this is always going to be a little lifestyle business, and it's something that's never going to be able to create volume. But it was part of my path, and I stuck to it. And I created a really simple way to manufacture the product. It's handmade by previously unemployed mothers. It's incredibly, incredibly efficient, and it's been able to help me actually scale my business through not using electricity and through employing many, many women. And it's actually been a reason why I've been able to get more contracts, because people want to back something that is going to create more jobs. And it was actually quite counterintuitive to what the original big corporate was thinking was the natural progression of how my path was going to be. But as long as I stuck to my gut instinct and my true path, everything happened as it should. So my next thing was I had these women, and I was creating jobs, and I was creating big impact with them, but I also wanted to create impact in the lives of school children that are hungry, that don't know where their next meal is going, that are child-headed households. And what better way to do that than to enable a vegetable garden to become part of the school curriculum? And I did that. I invented a thing called a garden in a box, really simple. And I then set up my own non-profit company called Real Life that works hand in hand with my for-profit company. Again, my path was always about creating maximum impact. And to do this, I believe that a business model needs to be a sustainable social business model, and I wanted to create this. Even though people in South Africa at the time said it doesn't really work, I was willing to go along that path and see if it would. Up to date, we've had influence in thousands of people's lives. We've implemented over 200 school and community projects. And people started to ask me at the beginning of last year, what's your next step? Where is your path going? And I said, well, I need to start scaling up the impact we're having in South Africa, but I can't just do that from selling our product through the small chains we have in South Africa. I need to sell it in somewhere like Europe. And people kind of laughed and said, well, how are you going to crack that market? How are you going to do it? And the answer was always simple to me. I was just going to get Richard Branson to back me. Yeah, that was basically the response I always had. Like, do you even know Richard? No, I don't know Richard Branson, but he will. He will back me. And so I started to follow my path on how am I going to get in contact with Richard Branson? How am I going to prove to him, like I sat in front of that dean's office and walked into his car and told him I was going to be in architecture, I wanted to do the same, basically, with Richard Branson. And I worked, and through many of the projects we've done and through the impact in the lives of children like these, they started to ignite my passion even more, because I knew that once I started to sell in the UK, I could take a percentage of all of those sales and put them back into my business here. And I'll be able to feed more children like these children in Bushbuck Ridge. So at the beginning of last year, I got there, and I had the ear of Richard Branson for 20 minutes, and I got him to back me. Richard Branson has been helping me ever since, and what enabled him to want to back Real Gardening was not the technology or the IP or the patent. It was about the fact that I, as a person, understood what my true path was. And I understood that I was a creator. And I understood that the universe starts to conspire in your favor when you start to make decisions from your gut. And not based on what other people feel that you should be doing at that point. You know yourself. And I knew I was a creator, and I wanted to have maximum impact through whatever I created. And Richard is a creator as well, and he loves to have impact, maximum impact. So as of next month, I'm proud to say that we're actually launching our product in the UK. A percentage of all sales of those products are going to come back into doing good in the communities we're working in. And the next step of my path is in front of me, and I'm very excited. And I just wanted to stand here and share my story with you, to tell you that you're never, ever too young or too old to find what is your true path, what is your big idea, and to stick with that and allow the universe to conspire in your favor. Thank you.